Yeah, let's move on to some Kamala and some Supreme Court stuff.
Let's do it. SCOTUS time, baby.
Where in the world is
Kamala?
Supreme Court. SCOTUS.
I want to start out with this clip here. Vice President Kamala Harris compares Supreme Court abortion ruling to slavery. Why don't you play the clip?
Mm-hmm.
United States Supreme Court, the highest court of our land, the former court of Thurgood Marshall, took a constitutional right that had been recognized from the people of America, from the women of America. We know, NAACP, that our country has a history of claiming ownership over human bodies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There she is. All she has to do is make that reference.
Yeah. Thurgood Marshall, by the way, was the first black person to serve on the Supreme Court. So, just really playing into the racial aspect of this whole thing, comparing abortion to slavery, things like that. Hey, you know what? Compared to some of her other speeches, I thought it was okay. And
she was able to form coherent sentences.
Yeah.
Golf clap from us.
But I thought this really had an interesting connection with this article that I found in regards to commoditization of human beings. Slavery was the literal commoditization of human bodies.
Right.
And the abortion thing, that is interesting because there is an article coming from The Atlantic.
Oh,
no, I'm sorry.
Atlantic.
This is from the Washington Post.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. This is from the Washington Post. And the headline is this: Women denied abortion rarely choose adoption. That's unlikely to change. In the Supreme Court's momentous decision overturning Roe v. Wade, Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. referred to the availability of adoption to women who find themselves pregnant with a child they do not want to parent. Quote, "A woman who puts her newborn up for adoption today has little reason to fear that the baby will not find a suitable home," Alito said, writing for the majority and summarizing the views of many Americans who oppose abortion. In a footnote, he cited a Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report juxtaposing the tiny, quote, domestic supply of infants in 2002 with the nearly 1 million Americans waiting to adopt. Okay. So right here in this quote here, it's sort of commoditizing the infants. Now, whether or not that's what Alito was trying to do, the way that it is being reported by the Washington Post, who admittedly is not here to make the Supreme Court look good, is starting to frame this idea that, hey, yeah, if you can't get an abortion, put it up for adoption. There's a million parents who are there's literally a million parents who are waiting to adopt an infant. But to put it in this domestic supply of infants is pretty gross to hear. Yeah. And especially when you have the Washington Post presenting it. Amid the furor that followed the court's 6-3 ruling on Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, an important point has been lost. The waiting list to adopt infants will almost surely remain very long. Quote, "What we're going to see, I think, is many more people parenting children that they did not intend to have," said Gretchen Sisson, a sociologist and researcher on abortion and adoption in the Advancing New Standards in Reproductive Health program at the University of California, San Francisco. "For powerful emotional reasons," she said, quote, "adoption has always been the rarest path to take." The number of domestic infants relinquished in private adoptions that did not involve a step-parent has dropped about 2% a year since 2012 to 19,658 in 2020, according to the National Council for Adoption, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization for adoption professionals and research. That's a far cry from the peak of roughly 89,000 non-relative adoptions in 1970. 3 years before Roe v. Wade legalized abortion nationwide. So right there, the numbers show that before Roe v. Wade, the number of infants getting adopted was significantly higher.
Like 4 times higher.
Way, way higher. Then Roe v. Wade was legalized. They say legalized, but it's not legalized. This is weird that they report it that way. But after Roe v. Wade, the domestic infant supply went down, and so there's less infants getting adopted. CCNT estimates that the new abortion bans will make an additional 10,000 infants available to adopt annually. That figure represents 9% of the estimated number of women who will be denied abortion. The increase will barely make a dent in the adoption waiting lists. Although there is no national source of reliable data, experts estimate the number of prospective parents at between 1 and 2 million. That's partly because of a decrease in international adoptions, which plummeted about 87% between 2004 and 2019 to 2,971 placements, as foreign governments eliminated or greatly curtailed the practice. The pandemic has accelerated the decline in both international and private domestic adoptions. Adoption experts and agencies, including many in the 22 states that have banned, will ban, or are likely to ban most or nearly all abortions. Don't you love how much they have to add into that 22 states?
That's a big caveat, or a big...
Yeah, they have to do so much to, and that number fell too. They used to report that as 23. Apparently one of the 23 decided they're not going to ban abortion. And so they got to fill in the gaps. It's just a weird way to do it. Do not expect that imbalance to change much. Quote, my view on what the Dobbs ruling will do for adoption is probably more conservative than what I've been reading out there, said Mark Melson, president and chief executive of Gladney Center for Adoption, one of the largest adoption agencies in Texas, which has a near total ban on abortions. Quote, I believe there may be a little bit of a spike for a few years, and then it's going to settle back down. Abortion access, which at least initially will remain much more prevalent than before Roe, is just one factor in women's decision-making, he and others noted. The increased societal acceptance of single motherhood is also a big one. Another, the hard truth that placing a child for adoption is an extremely difficult emotional step for most women to take. And I thought this was interesting. Sort of framing putting your unwanted child up for adoption as a much more difficult decision
than killing the baby.
Than killing it. Giving up what is your child versus killing your child before it is born is such a strange framing of it for me. And it goes into what would normally sound like arguments against abortion. Quote, if you think about human biology, our bodies are built to reproduce, said Janice Goldwater, founder and chief executive of Adoptions Together, an adoption agency based in Calverton, MD. Maryland. Quote, you have to override what your body is saying in order to make an adoption plan. And it takes a human being with a certain capacity to be able to do that. As if you're not overriding what your body is saying in order to get an abortion. Wow, even before Roe. What?
I'm sorry.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just exposing the sort of psychosis it takes.
There is a psychosis. It really is crazy.
Yeah, to accept this premise.
Yeah,
it's sad.
Even before Roe legalized abortion nationwide, unmarried pregnant women rarely chose adoption. Quote, there were just a magnitude more abortions happening than there were adoptions, CCNT said, adding that many more women also chose single parenthood over adoption. In the decades following Roe, many birth mothers and adult adoptees have spoken out about their experiences of trauma and loss related to adoption. Researchers have also documented the reluctance of unmarried women denied abortions to abortion access to make adoption plans. An analysis published in 2017 as part of a 5-year turnaway study, which found that abortion denial results in more harm to women than the procedure itself. UCSF researchers looked at the frequency with which participants chose adoption and the factors involved in their decisions. The analysis found that 1 week after being denied an abortion because of a late-term pregnancy, 14% of the 231 study participants reported plans to place the baby for adoption or considered it as an option. 9% of the 161 who went on to give the birth, 15 women placed their newborns for adoption. 9% of unmarried pregnant women relinquished their babies before Roe, Sisson said. So it's a lot of numbers there. But what they're saying is, yeah, I mean, once people have the baby, they suddenly want the baby, even no matter how hard it is. The interviews, as if this is this is being framed as the reason to let them kill the baby.
Yeah, it's really weird.
It's really grasping
It's really grasping at straws.
The reason we should let them kill the baby is because if we don't let them kill the baby, they will raise the baby.
and then, yeah, I mean, even talking, and I've heard the arguments about, the horrible adoption system, and why would you want anybody going through the emotional pains of adoption? Sure. Or being what am I thinking of? Oh my gosh. Brain.
No, I hear you. Maybe this will jog your memory. In interviews with researchers, turnaway participants gave several reasons for deciding to parent, including finding relatives who are more willing to help than they anticipated. Oh, imagine that. You have a family who's doesn't want
you to kill your
child. Like your family wants to be involved in your child's life. And the bond they felt with their infants after birth. Oh, yeah. Weird, huh? If you don't kill your baby, suddenly you feel...
Well, Basil,
like it's your child.
Nobody's bonding with an embryo, though, bro. Mm-hmm. Except maybe the mom, but you know.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the point. That's the whole point, is we got to kill these things before we get a bond.
Before we have feelings. Bond with it. Oh my gosh.
Last, they said they would feel guilty if they chose adoption, either because they believed adoption was an abjuration of responsibility, or because they believed it meant they'd have an ongoing knowledge of their child. The report summarized. So the ones who decided to keep the baby said they would feel that they would be giving up their responsibility if they put it up for adoption, or they'd have no, or because they believed it meant they'd have no ongoing knowledge of their child. Like, I'd be a bad parent if I gave up my child. Okay, but not if you aborted it, then you're fine. But then you wouldn't be able to keep up with its Instagram if you gave it up for adoption. It just is a wonderful look into the emotional truths that are being avoided when you can easily get an abortion for non-medical reasons or whatever.
Right. Yeah. What was I going to say? I don't know. I keep losing my thoughts on this.
And there's not even a dog biting your ankle.
Well, he's kind of moving around a little bit, but yeah, no, I'm just surprised at the level of I mean, I said it earlier, there's a psychosis, but yeah, it's not having no ongoing knowledge. They'd have no, yeah. So
yeah, I don't want to give my baby up for adoption because then I won't know
if it's
about
dead.
it.
At least I know it's dead.
At least you know.
It's better to know that my baby is
There's no
dead.
ongoing developments. You're not missing out on
Yeah,
anything.
than to know that, that they're out there in the wild and I don't know where they are or what they're doing. So yeah, very strange, very strange.
And what is revealing really is when they talk about reproductive health and abortion being a reproductive health thing. Now, of course, there are health reasons to get an abortion. That is totally a thing.
Yeah.
But what they really are pointing out in this article is the mental health with having a child and the guilt of, somehow the guilt of putting the child up for adoption to be adopted by a loving family who's been waiting for years to, raise an infant. Somehow that's more emotionally or mentally painful than snuffing it out early. It's just bizarre.
Hey,
and here's
go ahead.
No, I was going to move on.
Oh, I was just going to ask the question. I see the Women's Health Organization here mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it Jackson Women's Health Organization? Because I was thinking that's another WHO, Women's Health Organization.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe that can explain a whole bunch of the nonsense. Sorry, that's sexist.
Here's the analysis of that whole study. The analysis concluded, quote, political promotion of adoption as an alternative to abortion is likely not grounded in the reality of women's decision making. So that's why we should not politically promote adoption, is because when these women have the babies, they're not going to actually want to put it up for adoption. So make abortion legal.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to sort of grasp the logic. You can see them trying very hard.
They're
trying very hard to make a logical argument.
But they're almost they're being forced to work with very little to come up with their arguments. And I think that's what we're seeing here is like they're kind of out of real estate, so they have to really grasp at straws. And that really leads to some pretty wacky logic, which,
And it goes on for quite a while. The article keeps going for quite some time. But it gets into there's a lot of, outdated misconceptions about adoption. And there's been, some coercion and corruption in the system. And some of this is rooted in racism and, adoption is racist and things like this. So we need to educate people on adoption and maybe they'll put up their kids for adoption more often, things like this, which again is just repeating a lot of the talking points directly from abortion, because you hear that a lot, like oh no, you just don't understand abortion. It's not what it used to be. You got to destigmatize it. We need to give, education, things like this. And it's just honestly, it's just very hard to follow. It
is.
You got to be bought in, to understand this, to really have this article make sense. There needs to be an aspect of confirmation bias. This has to be confirming a bias that adoption is not an option, because it doesn't make much sense otherwise.
I need an appendix. I need some references. I need to really get into it.
Yeah.
Neck deep to understand, but.
Yep. And so there you go. You have the commoditization of all these infants who are going to be born now that adoption is not a thing. And part of that commoditization comes from the mother, who suddenly does have a connection with this child and suddenly sees it as the commodity that it is. You can, of course, commodity is sort of a bad term, but you can also kind of spin it around like, oh, wait, this little guy does have some value. I do want to keep him around. I do want to raise this child. And, suddenly my family is fine. And they want to become closer to me and this new baby.
Almost
it's
as
just
if
very interesting.
Children are a blessing or something. I don't know.
Almost as if the ancient wisdom of a child being the highest blessing that somebody could experience has been true all along.